Welcome to the next episode of Ask Me AnyFin, our series of conversations with FinTech insiders. Our guests today are Alan Blanchard, Head of Business Development at Apiax, and Sonia Sara, Field Marketing Manager for the same company. Great to have you here, guys. And the first question is to you, Alan. Your career path in recent years has been developing in the field of regulations and compliance. You worked for the Financial Conduct Authority, so we can say, metaphorically, obviously, that you have seen all 9 circles of regulatory hell, at least according to Dante's hell description. And if we stick to this analogy, we can say that you moved from hell to a regulatory heaven, which is a RegTech company called Apiax. But before we focus on Apiax itself, I would like to start from a personal question. What force is actually driving your career in the field of regulations?
Sure. Adam, it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show. Of course, there is kind of a driving force that sits behind that. You're very, very astute to spot that. And actually, it comes from when I started my first job, which was in a legal publisher, Butterworth as it then was, LexisNexis as it now is. And back in 1998, the company had a project to digitize all of its traditional books and written content and put them on this fantastic invention called the internet. And our users were very enthusiastic about this. It meant they didn't have to wade through all these paper books anymore. They could just do a search and get the answer. But they weren't very happy with that, because what they wanted was them just to be told what the answer was. So I want to ask my question and I want to be told the answer. And for a variety of reasons, we couldn't do that back in 1998, but it's a problem I've certainly been trying to crack ever since then. And then I moved out of the commercial publishing world into the FCA, as you quite rightly say. And here we were looking at, from a regulatory point of view, a sort of public information point of view, could we produce the digital rules for compliance to be done automatically? So it's the same thread coming all the way through. And I think that, eventually we will get to the point where we have these digital rules, these yes/no interfaces, but it's going to take a little while. So hence joining Apiax, because we're doing it. We're able to give you the answer to your question when you have an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is really exciting. So before we go deeper into the world of regulations, let's try and find the simplest definition of what they are. Because for me personally, it's quite an abstract notion, but you can tell us what your understanding of a regulation is at Apiax.
I mean, the obvious question there is, why is there an authority asking me to comply with a set of rules? I live in a free country. I want to make some money. I run a business. Why can't I just go ahead and enter a market and make some money? And the answer to that is because the rules are there to regulate the market, to ensure fairness, to ensure everyone is operating to a high standard, and to ensure trust and confidence. And you see this really in the contrast between countries that have a highly regulated environment like the UK and those where the regulation isn't as stringent. And it turns out, for the business point of view, it's not a good place to do business if you're working in a less well-regulated environment, unless, of course, you're a bad actor and you're looking to exploit the lack of regulation there. So I mean, in short, the regulations are necessary really for these money markets to operate, and for the benefit of society. You as a person, a member of society, participating in these marketplaces.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and I would like to stop on the quite new term called RegTech that is used for, in my opinion, that is used for all solutions that are helping businesses with regulations by using technology. But this my definition doesn't tell as much, I believe. So let's try to shed a little bit more light on what RegTech is actually about. Because for myself, it seems that we can distinguish two major types of RegTech solutions, basically. The first one is about allowing businesses to discover and understand the regulatory ecosystem. So it's about awareness and the knowledge of regulations. The second one is about delivering ready-to-use technical solutions that implement a specific business process that is required by regulators. Like, for example, it might be a user onboarding or KYC solution. So I'm curious about your understanding of RegTech term. Can you tell us your own definition of it, like especially from the perspective of your experience in this field? How, just the regulation and tech, like what they mean together?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, I think you've got a very good understanding there of what it means. When I look back at my time at the FCA, when we talk to regulated firms about what we could do to improve the FCA handbook there, they basically only had two problems. One, the first being that they couldn't find all the rules that they needed to follow. And the second one being that if they did manage to find them, then they couldn't understand how to comply with them, what was actually being asked of them. So, an incredible tension there. And I think that derives from the fact that the firms themselves just want a tick box of a list, a tick box list of things I need to comply with. And I've done that, so I'm going to tick that off. Whereas the regulator wants a principles-based, behavioral driven set of requirements to say, look, it's up to you how you run your organization. We just need it run to this certain standard. So there's an increasing tension there. And the role of RegTech really is to try and close that gap a little bit. So can we interpret what the regulators are requiring, what all the rules are requiring, and can we translate that into something that makes it super simple to comply with? Not exactly a tick box, but certainly, I have a query, here's what you need to do, here's the answer you need, and away you go. So, and at the moment, all of that is done manually using consultants, lawyers, spreadsheets, writing hard code into your processes and systems, and the breaches are still occurring, right? This isn't fundamentally solving the problem. The regulators are unhappy because their rules are not being complied with. The firms are unhappy because they don't understand how to comply with the rules in all cases. And the point of RegTech, I think, is to drive in, fill this gap, and just make it much more efficient and accurate from both sides of the table there.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very, very interesting. So my understanding is that this is what you're actually doing at Apiax as a RegTech company from Switzerland. So can you just explain a bit further where Apiax is on the RegTech landscape? What is your strategy?
Yeah, of course. I think it's following on really from the last answer there. RegTech is a massive spectrum of different activities and enterprises and what you're doing. There's a whole life cycle for regulatory compliance, for compliance management. And you see a lot, as you say, in the AML, KYC space, the client onboarding space, the reporting to regulators, but we're not really in there. That's an extremely well-populated part of the RegTech spectrum. We sit somewhere a little bit away from that side of things, really at the delta between legal and compliance. So the folk in-house or the external consultants who are doing all the interpretation, they're trying to come up with this checkbox of requirements, and the crossing that gap to the business side. So I'm conducting my business in an organization. I've got a client. They've asked for a particular type of product. I need to understand if I can sell it to them or not, for example. And Apiax will bridge that gap and say, you don't need to talk to legal and compliance. You don't need to raise a compliance process. You can self-serve your answer, and you can get that answer back to you straight away, and away you go. You can carry on doing your business. So really the delta, as I say, between legal and compliance and the business is where we sit. Very much actionable, results-driven kind of RegTech there. And the strategy, in effect, is to extend that across all of financial services. So at the moment, we're working in asset management, investment management, but we want to go across into retail, corporate, scale it all the way across financial services and then out beyond, right? So you can go to any regulated industry. You can close that gap between anyone really operating in a highly regulated environment. So this is why I think Apiax is isn't by any means a point solution, which we see with a few RegTech companies there solving specific problems. We are solving this problem of compliance ideally across the whole of industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So I have another one question connected to this one, actually. It's about maintaining the whole taxonomy, data models, processes in the context of the constantly changing legal environment. And this environment is changing in many jurisdictions at the same time. So I'm wondering, how is Apiax dealing with this specific, challenge of changes? You already said that, there is some guys at the backstage or at the back office, but maybe you can, just put some light on this aspect of dealing with that, whole taxonomy, data models, legal environment changing all the time. How do you guys maintain this? If it's not, just confidential, obviously.
No, it's not. We obviously do have an element of secret sauce to the whole thing, but here you're correctly identifying a hugely complex area, right? The problem with laws is that they change all the time. And when you're looking at laws all over the world, you're adding to that complexity over and over again, right? So, and the way that this is dealt with at the moment is that each individual financial institution goes off to find a law firm or an advisory firm to give them the update, and they might do this once a year, once every 2 years, spending a fair amount of money across the board. The way that we see this working really is a once and for many model. Rather than everyone doing the same job across, duplicating that effort across all of these organizations. We are taking the legal content, we are taking that from top tier law firms, from advisory firms who are doing this work once, and we then collect that all together. They've done the interpretation, so we can then do the digitization of that. And we have an in-house team of regulatory engineers who are pouring all of that content into our platform. So we've done that for everyone, right? So then anyone who wants access to that content comes in, plugs into our rule sets, and then we can distribute that out to whatever channel the end user requires. So you no longer have the effort of the kind of horizon scanning, the regulatory change management, the implementation. It's really just a plug and play. Here's all the content you need in the format that you wish to take it. So that takes, from a data point of view, that takes an awful lot of standardization, right? So we have to take all of these different content streams, we standardize it, and then we can allow for variances using a taxonomy. So the taxonomy is covering the standardization, but you as an individual firm, you'll want your own particular aspects of how you're going to manage that content, how you're going to deploy that content, and you can use the taxonomy to be able to do that. So we can start layering, so the complexity is reflected in the layers of content that's involved, but once you've standardized it and you've got it on the platform, the maintenance of that should be fairly straightforward, right? You should just be able to say, well, this rule has changed in this jurisdiction, therefore we're going to alter the digital version of that rule, and hey presto, it's done for everyone. So so we can get down to quite a granular level with this, right? But it is time consuming. It's taken us 4 years to get to 4 use cases for around 100 jurisdictions. So we're not going to take any shortcuts. We're going to do it properly. There's no AI, there's no ML doing this. That isn't where the magic is. The magic for us is in how when you ask your query, you configure your query. How does our technology give you the correct answer back? That's where our secret sauce is.
Yeah, that's really like a huge like job you've done, guys. That's really, because that's the area I was wondering, well, how to deal with it. But yeah, well, congratulations anyway.
Yes, definitely.
I can't take any credit for that.
Okay.
Kudos to you. Yes, this is really, really impressive. And the complexity of this regulatory challenge sounds overwhelming. And my question is, how does change affect you on a personal level? What are your ways of keeping up to date with all the regulatory changes?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered that off a little bit, right, in the last answer. So we don't do it ourselves. We use partners, and we're developing this ecosystem to help manage that change. So from a sort of practical point of view, we understand it's going to happen. It's not going away. It's probably going to get worse. So we are positioning ourselves to be able to manage that in the most efficient way possible. And then from a personal point of view, I mean, we're all for it, right? I mean, if things stayed the same, we'd be out of a job, right? We need things to change. We need things to be complex. And the more, Brexits there are, the more differentiation in regulatory regimes there are, this is all good for us. So it might not be the most efficient from a society point of view, but from our point of view, this is the challenge that we're set up to do. And, I've always certainly taken quite a positive outlook on change. I think, when you train as a lawyer, you're told that law is dynamic and it's always going to change. And this is why you're a valuable person, because you have the expertise, you have the depth of expertise to be able to understand a particular legal scenario, understand its changes over time, and always keep your advice up to date. And then when we moved sort of into the digital age, we were doing that with technology, right? There were different flavors of technology. There were static websites, there were dynamic websites, there's APIs, there's AI, this is always going to be moving forward. So we need to make sure we've got the content in the way we're ingesting the content in the most efficient way possible. And then we're outputting that using whatever the technology is that's going to drive that. And at the moment, obviously we're API based, but this is always going to change, and we're always going to be ready to be able to make sure that we're meeting that challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I would like to focus a bit on Apiax product, actually the product development roadmap. As an IT consultancy, we build fintech products, and in every single customer-facing application we build, there is a need for a solution for user onboarding or KYC, for example. And as far as I know, your company is currently building such a product. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? How can fintech companies use it? Which markets, countries, jurisdictions it will be compliant with this kind of a onboarding or KYC solution?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Very happy to. You're absolutely right. We've developed, as I said, four apps. The latest one is on client onboarding. And the use case driver here is, what do I do when I've got when I have a client with a hugely complex structure? So this will be a variety of legal entities sitting in a variety of jurisdictions. And there will be a variety of requirements around the documentation I need to be able to identify this client and then run my KYC and AML and due diligence. And at the moment, that process is horrible. It's backwards and forwards with the client to the lawyer, to the in-house lawyer, maybe even to an external lawyer. It's slow. It's not too bad in the retail space, because usually it's an individual person with a driving license or a passport or a bill or whatever it is, and away they go. They can prove their identity. When you've got a complex legal structure like a trust or a particular type of corporate structure, there you've got to dig into that structure to be able to identify the different components of that, and then the different legal entities, and also the natural persons that sit under that as well. So what our app is trying to do is help you through that process. So we have configured it in a way where you can input the type of client you've got, and then we will drill down through the different layers of complexity. So whether that's across a jurisdiction, across a particular legal entity type, until you get to the point where you've identified all of the layers that sit under that. And then we will provide you with the regulatory requirements, which are these are the documents you need from that person, from that entity, to be able to onboard them to go ahead. So we're transforming really a horrible process that takes days, weeks, might not always be very successful, to something that is now only a few clicks, a few minutes worth of working through our app for you to be able to get to the answer.
Yeah, and like your specific products or components, they are like limited by localization. I mean, by the business localization, or so. I mean, are you focus as a company more on, I don't know, like UK-based companies or Switzerland-based company, or wherever, or it's there is no, those kind of limitations when it comes to use your solution.
Yeah. So, well, for us, we're digitizing the rules by jurisdiction, so it makes no difference whether you're in the UK, Singapore, Switzerland, Brazil, or wherever. If the rules are digitized for the location you're in and the location you want to do business in, hey presto, off you go. So the only issue stopping us is that you might come to us with a particular structure where we don't have the digital rules yet. So we would have to have a process of onboarding those rules. But in theory, you can come from any country in the world to us and say, I need the rules for X, Y, and Z jurisdictions, and here you are, where you go.
Yeah, I got it. So like technology itself, it's ready, but it's about let's say content. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. So what is the next big thing on your product roadmap that you can probably perhaps tell us about? Something that in your opinion will be a significant value offering for your clients? Is there any specific technology related innovation behind this product?
Yeah, so so for us, there's not really we're not really looking at it from a technology point of view. I think we're at the forefront really of the way that we digitize the content and the way that we distribute that content through APIs. At the moment, that's best in class, right? Until you get something better than API coming along, that is where we're going to sit. So for us, the development is in pouring that content onto the platform. So how many digital rules do we have? How many jurisdictions do we have? And then growing that out across the different areas of compliance practice. So we're definitely using the kind of experience of the last year to drive that. So, a lot of people have realized that these manual compliance processes are no longer effective. So here we are, we're able to build you a solution based on the particular use case that you've got available to you. So we have some that are off the shelf, obviously, but then we're going to have some that are driven by client demand to say, hey, we need an investment banking solution for mergers and acquisitions or whatever. Here's the content, build that for us. So we can do that. And then I think we're going to be looking at how we scale that really. So once you're in an organization, how quickly can we, digitize the whole of your compliance processes? That's going to keep us very busy for the short to medium term. But then we are also looking at improving our partner network. So can we plug our rule sets into existing technologies? Can we build something that looks like a very nice end-to-end compliance solution as part of a chain of technologies and solutions there? Can we work with consultancies to design very bespoke pieces of kit that meet the requirements of really the biggest financial institutions and that sort of thing? So really, we are flexible enough to be used in so many different use cases and in so many different requirements that part of the issue is we need to stay quite focused on what we're doing, what our core work is, and then we've got to time it right in terms of our expansion out into other areas.
Yeah.
It was our last question. Yes, I'm really impressed, and it sounds like you've mastered the art of making complex things simple. So this is amazing, and we are looking forward to hearing about your new offerings.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. No, thank you. Thanks so much for having us. It's been a pleasure to speak to you guys. Hopefully next time we'll all be together in the same room.